Hi, and thanks for joining me for this flip video of the Crafter's Companion box kit number 20. This one is all about layered stencils, and in this first part of the video, I'll just be making some backgrounds, which I may or may not use in my cards, but I like to just sort of play with the stencils and create some elements that I can use during my card making and hopefully have a lot to choose from. So these layered stencils, or layered stencils in general, are new for me. I've never actually used them, and that's one of the things I really like about the Crafter's Companion boxes. They kind of have a different theme for each of their boxes that's kind of centered around the different product lines that they offer, and so it's kind of nice to get a peek into these different styles of card making, different tools, different supplies, and whatnot. And in this one, you do get a lot of different stencils, so that's really cool. And they all do come in sets of three, but they do have stencils in I think three different sizes and several different designs in each of the sizes. So this one has this nice all over background, and then it has two design stencils that have this floral design. So one is sort of the background shape of the flowers and leaves, and the other is a more detailed layer where you can go in with a darker color to give it some extra depth and dimension. And this set of three is also a little bit interesting. It has this butterfly pattern, and I'm going for like an uneven look where it's a little bit darker around the edges and a little lighter in the center. And then you've got this really the stripy pattern that's meant to be an extra layer of detail over just your butterflies. So I thought that was kind of a different look for butterflies, because instead of getting sort of all of that intricate wing pattern, you get this more I guess modern kind of look to your butterflies. And then with this set came this stencil that I guess is like a daisy floral pattern. And since the stencil is small and I'm trying to cover a larger panel, I'm just doing some repeat stenciling and lining up the stencils so that wherever it was cut off, I can kind of complete that image. It did leave me with a little bit of this gap here that I didn't really plan very well for. Otherwise, I think I could have avoided doing kind of that partial stenciling, but it's okay because I think I'll be layering on top of that, so maybe I can hide some of that imperfect stenciling. So these stencils, the way that they've actually um, uh, numbered them is they have I think A, B, C. So A is your bottommost layer, and then comes B, and then comes C. What I'm going to be doing here, though, is I'm taking these really pretty, again, I think they are daisies, and I'm gonna stencil a variety of them, and I'm just trying to make the most efficient use of my cardstock because my plan is to actually fussy cut these out and to use them as die cuts. And so this particular pattern or set of stencils, there's a sort of that all over fill of the flower and the stem, and then you get a another stencil to layer on top of that that gives the shadows and that extra little bit of dimension. So I'm not the best fussy cutter, so I've left a pretty wide, white edge around everything. But I think these shapes are pretty simple, so they're not super hard to fussy cut out. And off to the left side there, that's the bottommost layer. So what I found with a lot of these stencil sets is that there will be kind of this all over kind of background fill, and it's really nice because you could use that just by itself, or you could use, like I'm doing here, the top two layers by themselves. So there's a lot of versatility with these um, sets of layered stencils, which is really nice. So I may check out the rest of the product line that they have, and just see what sorts of other layered stencils they have, and see if that's something that I might actually be interested in, because these I don't generally buy a lot of stencils, and this is a really cool way to kind of use them. And so I'm just doing the same thing that I did before, but in a different color. And I think I'll use this probably for my pop-up card, where I'll just create like a bouquet of flowers. So I'm just trying to give myself a lot of different colors, a good variety and of sizes and shapes, and that's kind of nice with this one because you get these flowers in at different angles, different sizes, and it's pretty easy to stencil through. And certainly you could use it as a background as it's intended, but I kind of like stenciling these as individual flowers, and then I'll just create my little bouquet of flowers from assembling the die cuts. This is the all over pattern, and you can see it's labeled 1A, so A being the bottommost layer. And I didn't think that it was, dark enough. It's a very subtle pattern, so I'm kind of going over the edges a little bit and giving it, some extra depth and dimension. And it's really pretty all over delicate pattern, and I keep kind of going in with darker and darker colors just to give it a little bit more interest there. And a lot of times when I'm doing stenciling, I'll have a little tray or a little bucket of soapy water, and I'll just throw my stencils in there. But I didn't have that prepped this time, so I am taking the time to clean my stencils as I go. With this one, I had the idea for my interactive card to really try to emphasize this whole layered effect. So my thought was that I would stamp these various panels on the slimline card and have it at different stages of being layered. So this topmost layer here that I'm working on now is going to have both layers. So this is kind of similar to that butterfly pattern, but where it's got some stripy circles and dotted circles. I don't think it is actually meant to line up 100% on the solid circles. So I've definitely intentionally offset it just to have it look a little bit different. And then the third stencil that comes with this is this butterfly stencil. And so what I'm doing here is actually I've cut a piece of acetate that I used my sort of my flimsier acetate, because this is a little bit of a prototype. I'm not sure if this idea is going to work, but and I'm sorry that I'm working a little bit off camera here. I wasn't paying super close attention to what was going on camera, but I just took my alcohol marker and colored through the stencil onto the acetate. And my idea was that I was gonna you'll pull this piece of acetate up, and then as you pull it up, it's gonna sort of fly or drift over the various layers of the stencils. So that first block in the center, that's just one layer, and then the topmost block, that's two layers. But once the butterfly is over that, then you'll see all three layers combined. That was the idea anyways, so you'll see when I get to the card making whether it's a successful design or not. And then, so with this panel, again, another really pretty, this is a really pretty stencil. You could use it for maybe some snow, because it's just got that irregular kind of dotty pattern, which is really nice. I really like having all these various different patterns that you can use as an all-over background or as elements. So here I'm using just some thick, sort of a textured paste, and I'm mixing in some gouache, watercolor, and paint, and coloring that textured paste. And I'm gonna do this in some pinks and purples, and I've blocked out some of the smaller butterflies, so that's why you see on my stencil there's some orange. So those are areas that I've kind of masked off so that I don't stencil through those. And then I'm just using the larger butterflies that I'm stenciling this texture paste through. So so that way I get these really kind of raised effect, and it's a very three-dimensional kind of mixed media sort of design. So I'm just gonna, and one of the reasons why I decided to do this was because if you noticed on my first panel that I stenciled, I could see that there was a little bit of that first layer that came through on the butterfly designs, and so I kind of didn't like that effect, and so that's why I decided to use, and you can kind of see it here, where some of that blue sort of zigzaggy pattern, you can see that on the flowers as well. And so that texture paste just helps to kind of block, out that first background layer, and that way you don't see that pattern coming through on your subsequent patterns. And so with this first flat card that I'm creating, it's just really simple because I did my stenciling on the card blank itself, so my sentiment is going to be added right on top of that. And I decided to go with something a little bit smaller than the first piece that I stamped out. And so I guess technically I'm cheating a little bit by adding this second layer of accent with the solid color cardstock, but it's still a fairly flat, easy to mail card. And I'm using this more. I'm thinking this would be more used for like a little gift tag because it's so small. So with this card, this is going to be a layered card, and I'm just using some of the solid color cardstock to use as mats and layers. And they do provide in this kit, kind of similar to the stencil box kit, where you get a lot of solid color cardstock. And so for each color, you kind of get a light, a medium, and a dark. And so that's really nice because then you can really have a lot of variety, and you can do a lot of matting and layering. And so here I'm gonna make a couple of mats here, just using both the pink and the purples, and some foam just to give it that extra dimension. And I really love the sentiments that, in general, Crafter's Companion includes. I think their font choices are just really lovely, and I also really like how they mix the fonts a little bit in their sentiments sometimes. So sometimes you'll have this really kind of standard font, but then you'll have a more scripty font for like a word or a couple words within that sentiment. And that just helps to kind of add a little interest and a little extra emphasis to certain words. And they always have something a little fun, a little different in their font choices. So really always love that. And then you always do get like some really very usable kind of everyday general purpose sentiments. So they always kind of have a good selection there. But they do almost always, I think, include like a happy birthday sentiment, which you can really never have too many of. Birthday cards are probably the style of cards that I use most throughout the year, so it's always really nice to have a nice selection of birthday sentiments. And so here I'm just putting some foam where it's going to be touching the card base, and then just liquid adhesive where it's going to rest on top of the layers that are already raised. This was my panel where I used that texture paste, and the third layer of the stencil does add the extra detail to the butterflies, and so now that the texture paste is dry, I'm just going to ink right on top of it with a darker ink just so that I can get that extra detail on the butterflies. So I think this one was really fun to do. I kind of like using the texture paste just to add that extra dimension, but also to block out the first layer of the pattern, and that way you get a nice solid layer. So that's pretty, that worked out pretty well, I think. It's just a different look, because certainly you could just ink over it with regular ink, and you would get both the dotty pattern and the detailed pattern. Or you could do some masking and just not ink the background layer where you intend to ink your butterflies. And I think this black cardstock did come out of my stash. A lot of times when you kind of have bright colors, it can help to matte with some black just to give it a little bit more striking look. That contrast often is really nice. And also I tend to stamp my sentiments in black, and so having a little bit black somewhere else on the card as one of the mattes also makes the sentiment not stand out too much, because then it's nicely anchored with that black border. And so, and a lot of these sentiments are nice bold fonts too, so there's, there's a lot of black in some of those more bold words, like the word special here. So it really helps to kind of have some black somewhere else on the card just so that it ties in nicely. And using some of the leftover scraps, I'm gonna add a couple of little banners as additional accents. It's really nice that they have so much solid color cardstock, and it all, matches really well, or at least happens to, with the various media supplies that I have. So that's one of the nice things about having the various shades that they've included, because then you can really kind of find what matches and works with whatever inks or different media that you have. So I do like that they've included so many different colors of solid color cardstock. And I did do a little bit of offsetting with the black matte layer on my sentiment panel here, and I thought about putting it on some foam, but instead I'm just adding an extra layer of cardstock, because part of the sentiment is going to go over the butterfly, and so these extra little shims, I guess, will kind of help that sentiment banner sit a little bit more flush so that it's not sinking in. And so I've just cut just some scrap pieces just so that it brings it up to the same level as my butterfly. So another really pretty simple card to put together. This is that interactive card that I had mentioned earlier, and it's a little bit of a prototype. So what I'm doing is just cutting out a little window, and this is going to be a slimline card. And so I don't have any dies that are specific to slimline. So I'm just gonna just hand cutting with a steel ruler and my utility knife. And so that's gonna sit over top of my card panel here, and the idea is that you pull that piece of acetate to have that butterfly go over the other two panels that I stenciled through. And I think overall it worked out okay. But for one, the mechanism itself This was just more of a prototype. I won't be giving this card to anyone. So I did use my acetate, which is a little bit thinner and a little flimsier. Certainly, if you were going to make a card like this, you would want to use a more sturdy acetate. And usually the sheets of acetate that Crafter's Companion includes in some of their craft kits and that they sell online on their website, that's thick, good, sturdy acetate. So highly recommend that. It's a really nice quality acetate. For prototype purposes, I'm just using my thinner one, but this would definitely benefit from a nice sturdy piece, because I found that sliding it up worked just fine. Sliding it back down was a little bit more troublesome. But here I've attached some cardstock at the bottom of my acetate that's cut a little bit wider than the acetate itself, and that's going to serve as a stopper, and that way you can't pull that piece of acetate out completely. And I decided to kind of ink my frame just to give it a little bit more interest and not have it be so plain. And so I'm giving it a little bit more of a distressed edge by going in with a darker color just around the edges. And all of that's going to sit on top of some foam so that the acetate can kind of freely slide. And it may be hard to see, but I did add a little bit of extra foam right where I want my acetate to stop going upwards. So when the butterfly hits that top panel where I've got 2 layers of the stenciling, that's where I want it to stop sliding so that you can't pull that piece of acetate completely out of the card. And so I just was adjusting my little stopper piece at the bottom a little bit so that it instead of using cardstock, I used some acetate because it looked like I didn't really measure everything super well, and so some of the cardstock was actually visible. So that's why I changed it over to acetate. Of course, all of this is just kind of prototyping, but I did want to kind of make it as realistic as possible. So at the top here, I'm going to attach some a little pull tab. So I just used my circle punch to punch out a circle, and I cut that in half, and I'm gonna adhere that to my acetate so that you have something to pull. And the I think in concept this is sort of interesting, but I didn't really like how the alcohol inked butterfly looked on the acetate. I originally inked through the acetate, and that looked a little bit too faint to me, and so then I went back over the butterfly just straight with my alcohol marker, and I kind of wish I hadn't have done that. So I might try that again, maybe with a different set, I'm not sure. So this is going to be my last card. This is my pop-up card, and I am using a Karen Burniston die set, and this is a pop-up card where you can, I think it's their parcel pop-up is what it's called, and she has really, really good tutorial videos on how to assemble these. So I'm not gonna kind of go into detail in this video, but certainly if there's any interest, just let me know in the comments. And the next time I use this die set, which I know I'll be using again, because I love how this sliding pop-up mechanism works. But the idea here is I'll be creating this little flower pot, and it'll have a bouquet of flowers that comes out of the flower pot. And I did stencil my background and inked my background, and here I think you might have caught another video where I did this. Sometimes I die cut out of my foam sheets so that I can have like edge to edge foam on my die cuts, and instead of just throwing away what's left over, I just do this where I use those little scraps to kind of fill in, because you don't see that anyways, and then it gives you a more or less even surface. But I'm gonna create my front panel first, that way I can put my pop-up mechanism in. And here, there's my flower pot going in. And it's really, really easy to put together. And I think if I had to do this over again, I would probably decorate the back of the flower pot a little bit more, just that the inside of the card blank. But I think it's still a really nice, pretty card. And I am using a piece of the stiffer acetate that Crafter's Companion often includes in their card kits or craft kits. I don't think there's any acetate in this particular kit, so I pulled this acetate from a different box kit. But the reason why I use theirs instead of mine is because my acetate is really flimsy, like I mentioned, and you want something that's going to really stand up and be able to hold all of these die cuts. And so theirs is definitely higher quality than what I happen to have in my stash. And so I'm really glad that I have their box kits, because I haven't had to buy any acetate from them. I've just been a little bit precious about using what they've provided in in their box kits, and so I only use it when I know I need that extra sturdiness. And now that I have all of these little die cuts, I can kind of layer them and tuck them in, and because it's all going onto acetate, it just looks like it's flowers that are kind of growing out of this little flower pot. And I'm trying to make it look a little bit exaggerated, where there's just like a smaller, thinner amount of flowers at the bottom closest to the pot, and then it's sort of kind of exploding out towards the outer edges. So, and once you get to a certain height, you don't have to worry about going outside the boundaries of the little flower pot, because at the top it doesn't really have to slide behind the flower pot. So I did reserve some of the die cuts to put on the front of my card, and using some of the flatback pearls that come in the kit, but I'm also using some of the flowers that they included. So they've included some 3D paper flowers in white, and that way you can just ink those up to be whatever color you like. So I've inked up some of them in some yellows and some white. So here is a final recap. I did put a little white flower onto this card. So I guess technically I don't really have a flat card, because once I added that flower, this is not so flat anymore. I didn't really think about doing that when I added that flower, but here's a layer card where I did go in and add some of the flatback pearls, which also comes in just this pearly white, but you can color those with your alcohol markers and give them a different color. So here again, I've added them to my banners, but I left it in white this time. And this is the one that uses the texture paste, which I thought turned out really well. And then I've got my Slimline interactive card. Like I mentioned, I think that outline is just too distracting, because it's just so much more bold than everything else. So I sort of wish I had left it alone and not gone back in to darken those edges. But the concept was pulling it through and then seeing the different effects of layering those different panels. And as you can see, I'm struggling to push it back down because I did use my flimsy acetate as opposed to a nice sturdy acetate. And so here I've colored the pearls using one of my alcohol markers, and I decided not to use the paper flowers on this one and just used my die cut flowers. But it's really nice being able to use these stenciled patterns as just a separate die cut element that you can create and not necessarily having to use them as a background. One of the stencils in this set of 3 I did use on the front of my card as a background, but it's pretty subtle on camera, but you can definitely see it in person. So I hope that you enjoyed these cards, and thank you again for joining me. I hope that everybody's staying safe out there. Have a fantastic day and happy crafting. Bye.